Hello there. Happy Wednesday of Valentine's Day week. We hope you're enjoying all of our information. Kenny's videos are awesome. So today we are paralleling the skin of the face, and we are talking about the elasticity and plasticity, if you will, of the vagina. So when you think about the vagina is an epithelium or a skin, just like the inside of your mouth or the inside of your gastrointestinal tract. That tissue there is very similar. It's used to being moist, and it's used to having water. Like the outside skin of our body kind of repels a little bit more, and it's a different type of epithelium than our vagina and the inside of our body. But an epithelium nonetheless, meaning a barrier between the inside of your body and the outside. So and this discussion kind of parallels yesterday's discussion where we were talking about methods and treatments to help with vaginal health. So when we're talking about elasticity and plasticity of the vagina, you just have to realize that for the vagina to be the most elastic and plastic, meaning stretchable, moldable, you really need fluid and you need water. And so what types of things stimulate the vagina to hold more water, or that tissue to hold more water? Well, number one, hormones help, right? Specifically estradiol, but you can also use estriol, DHEA, testosterone. So really there's multiple different ways to do that. And you can be kind of innovative because while some people can't have certain products, maybe for a cancer history or such, there's other options that are available. So it's really nice to know that you can actually medicinally stimulate vaginal lubrication. The other thing you can do is you can use procedures, and those procedures use the exact same technology as with other areas of our body, such as our face. So you can use the CO2 in the vagina, you can use radio frequency in the vagina, you can use other modalities in the vagina, you can shockwave in the vagina, etc. Just different ways to kind of talk to that tissue with different energy sources. And I think a lot of us wouldn't think of our vagina in the same sentence that we think about our face, but how cool it is that they actually are very similar, and how when I CO2'd my face, my hand, and my vagina all at the same time, and my vagina totally healed up before my face, and my face healed up before my hand. And my hand actually kind of trailed my stomach. So it's really cool with all the different epitheliums. Yes, they are barriers to the outside world, but they recover at different rates. Which kind of also leads again to that resiliency of the vagina and how it wants to heal, because it does heal really quick, like the inside of your mouth, and it's super, super forgiving. So even like after all the babies that I've delivered and all the vaginas that I've sewn together, you know that you just kind of have to reapproximate things to get things kind of closer together, and your vagina, being awesome, finds its way to kind of connect itself and heal lots of things within itself. So that's cool to know. So a question that people asked us yesterday was, somebody messaged us about their daughter having some more vaginal discharge. And so again, the vagina loves lubrication and loves hormones. So what happens is a lot of times, potentially one of the first things that a young girl might notice before she has periods, and periods are not going to come sometimes for a year or 2 years, but you might notice increased vaginal discharge. And that's because as the ovaries kind of start becoming a little bit more aware of wanting to wake up out of that kind of frozen state they've been in since birth, and they produce a little bit more hormones. Those hormones stimulate lubrication of the vagina, which translates into vaginal discharge. Now, if the discharge is itchy, or if it smells weird, then that can be an indication of a vaginal imbalance or an infection. Now, a lot of times when we think about an infection of the vagina, our brain can go to, oh my gosh, I don't want anything inside my body causing horrible things. But most times bacterial vaginosis, yeast infections, etc., they just cause itching and a discharge. They're not going to climb up into your body and cause some horrible pelvic inflammatory disease. So they're just locally treated. If some people say, I don't really bug, my yeast infection doesn't bug me, you don't have to treat it. And bacterial vaginosis, there's a lot of people that walk around with that and don't even know it, that might never get treated. So it's interesting to think about things in that regard, because I think as an infection to me makes me feel super overwhelmed. But to know that the vagina is resilient, it's got amazing lymphatics, etc., just kind of lets you know that your vagina has your back and nothing crazy is going to happen to you. And so it may be that that young girl is having increase of hormonal production, which is increasing vaginal discharge. On that note, another question I'll get from a lot of women is, I have discharge and it bothers me, what is normal? Which is a great question, because I have absolutely no clue. As long as it's not itching or burning, I don't really get too amped up about it. We have routine screening for sexually transmitted diseases in certain populations. But sometimes we just have a discharge, and some people have more of a discharge than another, and that's just normal to them. So pretty much I think in a woman's life over a lifetime we define what our normal discharge is, and we know when we kind of veer from that. So, and comparing myself to someone else in the office or my sister or my mom, it's just not the same. I'm going to define myself in that regard. So don't feel like what your friend has means what you have to have. You have your own whatever normal is. So my first gut reaction to a young girl that's noticing increased discharge is just some waking up hormonally of her body. But look out for not scratching, but itching, odor, etc. And then we can also culture that really easily, because I think as a young girl, if somebody goes in and looks at my perineum, I'm intimidated. So when they come in, I just kind of describe for them what's going on. Does it itch? I want them to feel super empowered about their body and what's going on. And a lot of times I'll just culture the outside with a Q-tip, and we'll go over the whole routine before we actually do it. And I think it goes really well and can be very empowering. So that's what I say about discharge. And then the other question we were talking about, what was the, what's, oh yeah, skin tags. Okay, sorry, couldn't forget that one. So what the heck are skin tags? So we can get skin tags a lot of times over our body. We can get them in our neck. We get them where there's friction. You can get them in your armpit, like underneath your breast, and we can get them down here in our groin area. So it is just where the skin has gotten a little bit, it's reacting to friction, and it gets a little taller. These little things, they're little brown things a lot of times, and sometimes they'll bleed and look, they're in different colors, which freaks us out that we think we have a melanoma, but actually those little things are just getting irritated. And when we bleed, sometimes you deposit hemosiderin, which makes it look like a different pigment color. So that actually can be normal. So skin tags, life is hard, skin tags are easy. So you can come in and it's really easy to remove those. You can either inject a little local numbing medicine at the base and snip them off. Some people will tie them off. Actually, I found that if I get some good iris scissors, and the iris scissors are this really little itty bitty sharp scissors, I'll hold on to the skin tag with a pair of pickups that I'll just cut over it, and people do great with that, because injecting local numbing medicine is uncomfortable. Snipping it off is the same or even less uncomfortable, and so you're not having all these steps. Sometimes they'll bleed a little bit, but if you hold pressure, it totally goes away. So skin tags are actually really easy. The other thing to kind of press upon here that comes to mind as I talk about skin tags and cutting things off our body is how freaked out we can get about infection of anything in our body, but our body's actually super duper duper resilient most of the time. So routinely, I'll cut off skin tags. I'll put like pellets in the body or whatever else things I'm doing. And I never give a routine antibiotic in those settings, because your body takes care of it and it does great. So if you're at home and you've got a crazy skin tag that's totally bothering you and you cut it off, I'm just telling you that I don't think you should have to worry about a super crazy skin infection unless you have some sort of unique history to yourself. But in the office, I'll do those a lot, just cutting them off, or if the patient is apprehensive, or if it's a pretty broad base. And if I say broad base, what does that mean? So skin tag's kind of like a mushroom. If you've got a skinny stalk and you cut it off, usually no blood at all. But if you've got a big stalk and you cut it off, it's going to bleed a little bit. But just hold pressure. Sometimes you have to hold pressure for longer than others, but it usually goes away. So, and the bigger one, stalks, I tend to put a little local numbing medicine under, because you might have to take a couple swipes at it, and the more swipes you take, the more uncomfortable it is. But again, everyone's an individual with that, so that's a lot of times how I treat skin tags. So don't feel like skin tags are reflective of like a sexually transmitted disease, of something you're doing wrong. And some people actually, I believe, have a little bit more of a tendency to do that than other folks. So I hope that answers that question. And I think that's going to conclude our day today. Or we have a question. Oh yeah, what is it?
What determines when a woman starts her period? At a young age.
Oh, okay, so that is a great question, and I think we're still trying to kind of figure that out in a way. Like, I could give you a routine answer, but I think that's moving. And the reason I think that answer is moving is I just think there's a lot going on hormonally in our environment that we haven't quite keyed into and identified every variable. Because when you look at our population of young girls, I really believe that menarche, which is when you start having periods, is starting a little younger for most people. And the question becomes, why does that happen? The other thing too, you can just look at the bodies of teens, and it just really looks like it's different than it was when I was younger. So in that regard, I can't really answer that question necessarily of what's happening with that. Does it happen to do with our food or our exposures of stressors, or I don't know. But I do think that there's a phenomenon there that we have yet to understand. So what happens is that your brain is always trying, Okay, so when you start having periods, it's your first period coming out of your vagina, and a period is just blood coming out of your vagina. Now, bleeding can happen because you actually ovulated. Bleeding can also happen because the lining is just imbalanced and going to come out. So it just kind of depends on why the blood's coming out. But I'm going to use your first functional period as a definition for what I'm about to say. So, your first functional period means your brain told your ovaries to fire out the egg. And the egg went out the tube and it didn't get pregnant, so that the little cyst of ovulation that got left behind keeps the lining of your uterus nice and supported for a couple of weeks, and then that cyst can't stay alive anymore and it dissolves and you have your period. So your first period is usually when the first egg is released from your ovaries. Now we all realize, I don't know if we all realize, but I think this is super cool, that when a woman is born from their mom, we usually have about 20 million eggs in our ovaries, and they're kind of like frozen for a while until they actually wake up. And as they wake up, they don't ovulate at first, they just start producing a little bit of hormones. So as they produce a little bit of estrogen, it's kind of like our breast buds start, we start getting a little hair here and there, but actually when the full-blown thing is all the way through is when we have the first ovulation. So what actually spurns the actual day is variable on environmental and genetic factors. There's averages that are well established, but I think that's kind of just moving a little bit. So hopefully that wasn't too technical, but it answered the question. And the other cool thing that comes to mind as we talk about this is you think about teens when you watch girls, and if you're a female and you're watching this, you know what happened to you. It's like, I think in 5th grade, I needed a bra, but I didn't start getting my period till I was a freshman. And so I was a little late in the game doing it. But that being said, you get underarm hair and you start getting pubic hair, and you don't get like a whole full amount of hair there to start with. You get like 1 or 2 hairs, and then they just kind of fill in. So as that's happening, your ovaries are waking up. Well, isn't it interesting on the back end of things, when we start to become perimenopausal, that our ovaries also do that same thing. They don't just jump off a cliff and say, ugh, I'm done. They just kind of like parachute from here or there, and there's variations. So you feel them gradually work in, and you also feel them gradually work out. Although I think it's harder on this end because we're used to them being there for us here, and so it's up and down and up and down, and there are a little bit sharper peaks and troughs on the back end of our like ovarian life cycle than on the front end. The front end, it's a little bit more gradual and then repetitive, and on the back end there's lots more spikes and then the cliff jumping, and we're used to having them. Now, being born with 20 million eggs our whole life means our ovaries are set the day we're born, and we're going to go through menopause at some time. And so guys are constantly producing sperm every 3 months or so. So you can imagine that it makes sense when I'm perimenopausal or menopausal that I don't reproduce anymore, because if I'm born with all my eggs and they've been radiated and exposed to everything, if I'm 65 years young and I'm trying to have a baby, then there's a lot that egg has been through. But if I'm 20, there's not near as much. So genetically speaking, we have less genetic mutations the younger we are a lot of times, simply because our eggs just haven't been exposed as much. The other thing too is I think that people a lot of times are, we're always searching for our reason that we're here, what's going on, and you think about it, oh my gosh, my mom had 20 million eggs when she was born. She had 4 kids, and I'm one of those 4. My dad has like 134 million ejaculate per blah, blah, blah. And so that's a really creepy thing to think as your parents, I know. But if you think about the math already makes it so you have a bigger likelihood of being struck by lightning or winning the lottery than you do of actually being born. So really, we're all miracles. You don't have to look around for one, you already are one, and you don't have to figure out what you have to do because you already are that. So that whenever I talk about the ovaries having 20 million eggs the day I'm born, you already know that you're a miracle. So that always comes to mind when I talk that 20 million number. So hopefully that was slightly uplifting. Any other questions? Well, I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for keying in. We'll be back tomorrow with another little brief thing, piggybacking the awesome Kenny and everything that he's talking about the skin. If you have more questions between now and tomorrow, please don't hesitate to let us know. We love questions and we love to answer them and talk about those things. So love thy vagina, and have a great afternoon.